Alright guys, so today we actually have a pretty cool video. It's going to be a short and sweet one. We're going to talk about how to read CSV files in Python. This is actually a question that was asked by one of the viewers, so if you have a question or a video you'd like to see, let me know and I'll make a video for you. Here we have a CSV file. If you're not familiar with CSV files, they basically mean a comma separated values file. They're actually probably the most common data format. You get them from Excel and they're just very common everywhere where you're working with data. So in this case we have a slightly special one because our delimiter is not a comma, but what's actually separating the values here is a semicolon. And that's actually not uncommon with CSV files. Sometimes you find things like pipes, the pipe character being the separator, or sometimes you get semicolons. I'd say 90% of the time you get commas, but this definitely can happen. And there are actually maybe 3 ways that I think are interesting to know about how to read CSV files. There's probably 100 ways to do it, but I'm going to show you guys the three main ways to open a CSV file in Python. So the first one, I guess, is the most Pythonic one, is just using the open file Python command, and this is probably the simplest way, but also there are some caveats here. So let's go line by line. The first thing I do here is I say if name equals main. You might have seen this before. What this means is basically we only execute what is in the scope if we're running this file directly. If we're importing this file, then this code is not going to run. So it's always good to encapsulate your scripts and put them under this if name equals main context. Now the next line here is with open username.csv r as file. The with is actually a context manager, and what a context manager is a special Python keyword that when applied to certain objects, it can let the object handle what happens when you enter the scope, and also let the object handle what happens when you exit the scope. So the open function, usually you could do something like this, where you say file equals open, blah blah blah, and then you do file.close to close the file. But because we're using the with statement, the closing of the file happens automatically whenever I leave the scope, so that's quite handy to know. The open function can open a file, and it takes a few parameters. The first one is the path, and the second one is a very important parameter, is the mode. So there are different modes. You can have the writing mode, reading mode, appending mode, and a bunch of different ones. I'd recommend reading the documentation on that. But because we're just reading the file here, we're just going to be using R, which is for read mode. And then we open it as file, which means we have bound the handle to this open file into this variable file here. Now what this is going to return in our case is a handle to the file, and then we can call read lines on the file and iterate through every row. Read lines will return a list of the lines in the file as string. So we can print every row, and then for each column in the row, we can split on our delimiter, which is the semicolon here, and then we can print the column. So if we run this really quickly and see what we get, you can see here that we got our file again. So we're printing the first row here, and then we're printing each individual value in the first row, and then the second row, and so on and so forth. Now the next way you can read a CSV file, this is actually the way I'd recommend, is using the built-in library CSV. The CSV library handles a bunch of the details for you, and they provide this really nice CSV reader method, which will return an object, which is your CSV reader, that is basically a generator that you can iterate through to get each individual row. The other thing that is nice about the CSV reader is that you can pass in a delimiter, so you don't have to sort of split on the line or anything like that. And again, we have the same thing. If name equals main, we're using the with open, and so on and so forth. So overall, a similar syntax, but this time we're just using the CSV library. So if we run this, you can see what you get here. So initially you get the row, and the row comes in as a list of each item, and the delimiter has already been processed, so we only get the items, and we don't need to worry about the delimiter in this case. And then we get each individual column again. Now this is actually my recommended method of reading CSVs if you just need to do something quick. It's pretty good. It will handle a lot of the detail for you, and also it's always good to know what kind of tools are included in the Python in the Python library, so in the Python standard library. So yeah, this is definitely a good way to go. The next way is a little bit more heavy-handed, let's say. So this is using Pandas. So for those of you who don't know, Pandas is a Python library that allows you to interact with these objects, which are called data frames. And Pandas data frames are very useful for filtering and processing data. The main downside of Pandas is that it's a fairly sort of heavy library. It comes with a lot of dependencies, and if all you need to do is open a CSV file, this is probably a little bit overkill. But if you're going to go on to process the data and filter and do all sorts of things, then this is a perfectly good option. The way you use it is you can define a data frame object by saying df equals pd.read CSV. You pass in your file name, you pass in your delimiter, and what this returns to you is a lovely data frame that you can use to filter your data and so on. So what I'm doing here, for instance, is I'm filtering the data frame by looking only at the rows where the username is equal to a specific username that I care about. So if we run this now, we're going to see a very different output. Now this is what we get for a data frame. You can see it has this sort of structure, and when we filter and print it, we get this row here. So those are, I think, the main ways to read CSV files. I think it's good to understand the differences and know exactly what you are going to be using. So that's it for today. If you guys like the video, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys on the next one.